Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the 2020 podcast, Canada's #1 optometry podcast. Thank you so much, as always, for taking the time to join me here. I'm so grateful for all the support, all the liking and sharing, everything that you do to really help the podcast grow. As you know by now, we're just over 200 episodes in and over 7 years of making the podcast, and I couldn't have done it without all the support from everybody involved. So thank you, everybody. And after I say thank you, I always ask a big favor, which is please do continue to support by sharing. If you could put a link on LinkedIn, send a link to a friend, put a screenshot up on Instagram or Facebook or somewhere, wherever you like to spend your time online, and tag us and let people know that you are listening and what you took away from the episode. I do think there's going to be a lot of really, really great value from this episode that, as always, I'm trying to help bring more information about our industry and about our profession that's going to help us all keep moving forward and growing. And I definitely think this conversation is going to provide that. My amazing guest today is Mr. Dave Brown, who is the CEO and President of IDOC. If you're not aware, IDOC is the largest independently owned alliance of optometrists in the U.S. So obviously very, very passionate about independent optometry. Dave himself has had over 20 years in eye care and has been with IDOC for over 11 years. And we're going to talk about IDOC's refreshed brand, their new identity, and what the plan is moving forward, and also about the industry in general. Okay, obviously IDOC is heavily entrenched in independent, but what are the other entities, private equity, corporate optometry, and help us get a better understanding of the landscape of optometry in North America. So, Dave, thank you so much for joining me here. Really glad to have you on.
No, I appreciate being here, Harbir, and I'm a listener myself, so I really enjoy your podcast. So I'm really pleased and honored to be on here today to talk about IDOC and kind of get into some of those topics you just talked about.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you. It's always great to have leaders within the industry from different organizations coming in to help us kind of see things from a different perspective. You know, optometrists, most of us are seeing things from our level as kind of practicing, and maybe we're involved in organizations to some level, but not at the perch of a CEO or a president or somebody at that level. So having that sort of bird's eye view, in a sense, is always super helpful. So Dave, if you don't mind, introduce yourself a little bit for those who maybe are not familiar with who you are.
Sure. So IDOC has been around for about 25 years now. So I'll go back to the beginning and then kind of fast forward a little bit. But sure. I always love to tell the story of IDOC, founded by an independent optometrist in Connecticut. And he brought together about 15 other independent doctors to a roundtable dinner meeting under the guise of we should be learning from each other. We're not competitors. We're all trying to do the same thing. So let's find out what's working, what's not working. And there was always a business side to it as well. Doctors are really great at being doctors, maybe not so much at the business side of things. So that's how it all started. It was built by independent ODs, for independent ODs. And, from there, it's been quite a journey. Most of these alliances around that time started with an idea towards scale and negotiating and helping compete, against sort of the larger players. And so that was always a part of IDOC as well. But I'll fast forward a little bit, Harbir, to about 2015. And I got to IDOC about 2014. And so, we began sort of a new journey at that point. One of our first plays was to acquire Prima. And for those who might remember that, Dr. Neil Gelmar, Dr. Jerry Hayes, two luminaries in the industry, had started sort of a consultancy practice. And so we added sort of consulting and advisory to what IDOC did. And that was very powerful. And ironically, they did a lot of roundtable discussions as well. So that, continues to be core to what we do. A couple of other innovations along the way, we created the first contact lens share program. We call that IDOC Select. And so that's where a doctor gets rewarded for loyalty, for providing more of their prescriptions, in this case for Alcon and Cooper. So that's been a great innovation. We're really big on data. I know in some of your podcasts, you talk to doctors about KPIs and data. And so we have something called IDOC Insider, which is powered by GPN's Edge Pro. So every member at our cost has access to that. And then we create how they are doing and put that up against the benchmarks of all the IDOC members.
That's amazing.
So that's really powerful. And then most recently, business solutions. I think we'll talk a lot today about, how hard it is, frankly, to run an independent practice. So we now offer bookkeeping and benchmark services and marketing services. So we can talk a little bit about that as well. But it's been a heck of a journey. We're really excited about what's coming, and we'll get into that a little bit here. That's a little bit about IDOC in a nutshell. And I'm really proud to lead this organization, and we've got a really strong membership.
That's wonderful. That's a lot of that sounds very, very helpful. As you said, doctors are great at being doctors, and unfortunately, we're not. Some of us are truly great business people, and some of us are not so much. So having the support, for those who are listening, I pointed at myself. For the people who are not so much, but having that support. And in fact, I was having a conversation with a couple of colleagues just last night about, talking about these metrics and KPIs and how certain organizations do provide solutions like that and others don't. And I think encouraging optometrists and business owners to dig into those numbers a little bit and providing the resources for them to do that, I think is extremely invaluable, in fact, for running a successful business. So that's really good. So you've given us a little bit of an introduction about IDOC as well. What about the rebrand? So tell us a little bit about this. What has changed and why?
Yeah, rebranding is something a company shouldn't take lightly or undertake lightly, I should say. So it's a great question. Why now? What's the reason behind it? We've been branded as IDOC for a long time, and we've actually used the term independent together for quite some time, and we will continue to use that. It's a phrase I love. It's kind of it has two sides to the coin, if you will, right? The together side of it is all about scale, peer-to-peer, the roundtable discussions. How do we learn from each other? Really, really important. But equally, the independent side is critical. I want to run the practice the way I want to run the practice. I want to do the things like dry eye or vision therapy that I want to do. I want to support these contact lens companies, all those examples. And so at IDOC, we provide a lot of choices for doctors to do those things, but we don't sort of mandate, you must do this, you must do that. So the rebrand and the refresh is really all about telling our story in a deeper way. We're going to be investing a lot more in marketing. Sometimes I cringe when people say IDOC's the best kept secret in the industry. So we're really not going to be that way anymore. And part of it, Javier, is all that we have to offer, right? We do so many things, and I kind of gave you a list of those things, but we also have HR support. We have a service called HR Now, which can help a practice state by state navigating the laws of employment and things like that. I mentioned books and benchmarks and optometry marketing services. We have a high quality lab, an independent lab that we acquired in 2023, Three Rivers Optical, with tremendous quality products and turn time and service, always having great vendor support and vendor savings, the data, the IDOC Insider, and our meetings. So what we're doing in this refresh is rebranding it all under the IDOC name. I'm sure you're familiar with sort of the term house of brands. So we'll talk about IDOC Labs. We'll talk about IDOC Books and Benchmarking. And the logo will be synced up across all of those different services. And last but not least, we're going to be far more visible in the LinkedIn and the socials and the Instagram. So we wanted our logo to translate better. So our color scheme is a little more powerful. Our consistency will be more powerful. And so really what it comes down to at the end is we want independent doctors to understand all that IDOC has to offer. We have so many ways to help an independent practice. And you might say, I really want your marketing service. Fantastic. Or you might say, my lab, I'm really interested in a new lab. And part of our job is to get you in the ecosystem and then also let you know everything else. So we're really excited about this. It's kicking off this week. I'm thrilled to be talking with you about it. It's very timely. But we're looking forward to having more independent ODs know more about IDOC.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's certainly a lot of resources and services there that could be beneficial to an optometrist, a private practice. What does it look like when somebody walks into an IDOC practice? Does a patient see that this practice is part of IDOC, or is it all behind the scenes?
It's all behind the scenes. The independent doctor is able to keep their brand, keep their vision, and so there isn't really any consumer-facing IDOC efforts, and nor will there be. This is about supporting the independent doctor, and with their vision, with their goals, with their objectives, and so we'll be keeping it that way for sure.
Got it. And as you're saying there, as far as when a doctor becomes a member, they can be selective about which services and resources they choose to participate in. When it comes to the lab, are there any requirements? I apologize, this is maybe a little bit off script from what we were planning to talk about, but are there minimum requirements for how much a practice is going to be ordering, or does all their business have to come from the IDOC lab, or can they go through different labs to provide their different types of lenses?
It's the latter. They can use the labs they wish to use. We will put ourselves up against any lab out there in terms of quality and service, and certainly pricing, which is something we'll be talking about. But in general, it's a great question, because IDOC it's a dues-based membership organization. You pay monthly dues. Some of these services or programs have an add-on fee to them, or an add-on dues. But most importantly, there's no contract. You don't sign up for IDOC for 3 years and you can't leave.
Gotcha.
So we have to earn the trust and the business almost every day. We think about it that way. And so, and as you know, Harbir, independent practices they're all very different. And so what one practice might need is very different from another. And so we don't try to say, hey, you should be package A or package B. We're very open to, if you love our contact lens program, fantastic. If you're happy with your lab, and we have lab partners as well on the vendor side, we're happy for you to use that lab as well.
That's great. That's great. And I know you mentioned there briefly the meetings. I have had the good fortune of attending a couple of them, and they really were great, really great events. And I go to a lot of meetings across North America, and so I kind of judge the caliber of the meeting by the level of the speakers, but also the attendees, like who's here, and what type of things are being spoken about. And really at the IDOC meetings, it was top tier speakers and conversations. And the reason I say who's attending is because a lot of there's the CE that you get in the lecture hall, and then there's what I call the hallway CE. And when there's really amazing people who are attending, who are great business people or great doctors and really high level performers, and they're the ones attending, and you're speaking to them in the hallway, you can learn a lot there as well. So I certainly felt that at the IDOC meeting. So I would encourage anybody, even if so IDOC meetings are only for IDOC members, is that correct?
No, anybody can come to an IDOC meeting.
Okay, good. Before I said that, I wanted to make sure. I've gone as a speaker, so I would encourage anybody to attend, because the quality there was very high.
No, I appreciate that, Harbir. So every year we have our national meeting called The Connection. This year it's coming up in Orlando, February 2026. You can head to idoc.net to learn more about it. But thrilled that you spoke at one of our meetings, and I'm glad you mentioned our speakers. We've got great speakers, and one of them, our keynote speaker in February, is going to be Chad Foster. It's an amazing story. He's built billion-dollar businesses, and he's blind. He graduated from Harvard Business School. It's going to be very inspirational. So we look forward to hosting him and having him at our meeting.
Wow, that should be an incredible talk. Yep, I'm sure that's going to be very valuable.
Yeah. And then the other piece of the puzzle is, so we have speakers, the vendors are there, and they have all their booths, and you get much more intimate time versus a massive trade show. We also, I love what you said, sort of the CE behind the CE. So we have receptions, we have cocktail hour, but we do the roundtables as well. And so that's critical. And it's so funny. We at times we'll put similar size practices together, and other times we'll split them up. And we always get, well, I'm a small practice. I want to learn how Dr. Harbir got to be a big practice, or I want to be together with the big practices to grow more. So we jam a lot into the 3 days, but I appreciate the support of it. And the other thing I'll just add is staff is a really critical part of our meetings. So the smart member brings their staff. They might reward during the year to go to the meeting, but we have staff tracks, we have training. Quantum Optical does a training session where they get a full day. And so for the practice itself and those who come, and it's a good swath of our membership, it's a powerful meeting. So they really mark it down and they come, and I'm thrilled you spoke at one of our meetings, of course, and we do our best, and we're really proud of the meeting. So I appreciate you mentioning it.
Yeah, it's great. It's great, really. I wanted to, as we sort of set off the top, I wanted to talk a bit about some of the other, or just generally the landscape of optometry right now. Of course, IDOC is entrenched in an independent and passionate about maintaining that independence. Why is independent optometry important? And maybe is it more important now than it has been in the past?
So I love the question. Independent optometry, in many ways is it's one of many options for optometrists and one of many options for consumers. And so, one of the things about independent optometry is, the practice is practicing on what they want to practice. And so they become really great at it, very good very good experts, very good at the different areas of things that they've decided to focus on. Consumers can tend to look at doctors differently, and there's no difference in the optometrist who goes here, there, or everywhere else, but they might look at a independent doctor. Maybe they'll think that's where I'll go for more medical, or maybe I'll go dry eye, maybe I'll go to this corporate because I know I'm going to get good value, right? There's lots of different reasons of, we won't get into a lot of consumer mindsets here, but the independent doctor, can at times operate a different headspace for the consumer. They're very good at contact lenses, quite frankly, and drive a lot of contact lens prescriptions. So I think that's very important. But at the end of the day, I think that because they can practice the way they want to, they can get into things like dry eye. They can specialize in, glaucoma prevention if they wish to. And I think that provides sort of a brand character for independent optometrists. At times, this tends to be the eye doctor. They're interested in technology. They're interested in new things. They're pushing the envelope on photographing the back of the eye and things like that because again, they're able to practice the way they want to, and they might be looking out at the landscape and saying, I can differentiate myself in these ways.
Yeah. Actually, coincidentally, I had an IDOC doctor on the podcast very recently, Dr. Jennifer Lyerly, and she's, or at least the practice, I believe, is part of IDOC, and so she is a perfect example of somebody who really is passionate about a specialty and wants to make that specialty work and profitable, but primarily, really provide that service to her patients. And there's a certain different level of fulfillment I personally feel that comes from providing a specialty service and helping patients beyond just that routine eye exam. And I think we really need to maintain that in optometry. I think that's, to your point, I think that's part of the reason why independent is so important, is so we can maintain that. One thing we were talking about in that interview was, if a large group, a private equity group or somebody comes in and they're crunching numbers, they'll say, well, this specialty may be not as profitable as just doing a routine eye exam and selling a pair of progressives. So maybe that's what you should just keep doing, is routine eye exam and selling progressives. But then if everybody was doing that, there would be no specialty care. We wouldn't be serving the population, our patients, as well as we could. So I think there's certainly value in maintaining independence for that reason. Otherwise, it would just all be the same.
No, I agree. And I think, the other thing, I agree with what you said, but, in addition, specialties take time, right? They don't you don't just open up dry eye and all of a sudden people come in. You have to market it. You have to train your staff. You have to get your staff cross-selling. So you need to give it a little bit of time. And sometimes that's hard in a more corporate environment, if you will, versus an independent doctor. So
definitely.
So it's worth doing that. But that often comes up at IDOC meetings and study groups is, how did you do it? How long did it take? How did you know you were on the right track? What did you do first, second, and third? And that's the peer-to-peer that is so powerful about IDOC, is that you have this group of individuals that you can reach out to. In fact, we just launched something new, Herbert, called Viewpoint, which is an app on our phone. So instead of having Facebook groups at IDOC and everything else, it's all there now, and it's gotten great adoption because the chats, and we're always on our phone now, chats are so much easier. So, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, and boom, all these answers come back. So it's very powerful.
Oh, that's excellent. Yeah, so it's a forum for IDOC members to connect. That's really great.
Yeah.
Have you seen, in this sort of same kind of conversation about corporate and private equity, my feeling is, and I don't know if I'm correct about this, it seems like there's a lot of this amalgamation happening right now. A lot of clinics, private practices are being bought up or wrapped up. Is that still happening? Is it happening at a fast rate? Is it slowing down? What do you see from your perspective?
Yeah, appreciate the question. It's probably been, over the past 10 years, and I think it ebbs and flows, interest rates and COVID and what's happening and whatnot. But I would say it's been pretty steady. And the reason for that is somewhat generational, as you well know, right? It's the doctors who are 60s or 70s and they're getting good valuations for their practice. Oftentimes within IDOC, I'll hear, I wish I had a doctor to turn this over to. I wish there was a partner there or something like that. And that's hard. The optometry schools are doing a great job, but also the corporate organizations are doing a great job recruiting as well. And so that's frankly something we'll be looking at in the future to help the doctors with that. So yes, it's happening, and I think it will continue to happen. I think once the doctor sells, we can, I don't really want to get into the private equity strategies per se, but there's a lot of cost savings, cost efficiencies that come when you aggregate. But I would just say growing a practice is hard. And so, I think the longer the private equity companies own the practices, sometimes the harder it is to grow. And what I would say is that IDOC is only focused on the independent doctor. So we don't have any short-term thinking. We don't have any concerns with that. We're trying to help the independent doctor grow, be the best they can be. And the other piece is the next generation coming in. That's why IDOC has this suite of services, because we want to make it easy for someone maybe who's in corporate optometry and wants to open up, or a student wants to. It's very different from 30, 40 years ago. So we need to make that as easy as possible so that people want to do this. And we think we have many ways for that to happen.
Yeah, that's actually great. In fact, actually, when you were listing out the different resources and services, I had thought about that, because it is one of the things that corporate setups or private equity type setups will advertise, in a sense, is like, practice as an optometrist and we'll take care of the rest, right? Because one of the biggest headaches as an owner is HR. And it's not necessarily that my staff are a headache, it's just the overseeing of all of it and understanding all the nuances of things. Doing the books is a pain. I'm not a big numbers guy personally, but I obviously you need to do them and understand them well. So those are things, if you have resources and services that can help streamline that whole process for ODs, I think it will help draw them over. Because on the other side of that fence, when you have the corporate entities saying, don't worry, we'll take that whole thing off of your plate, you just go be an OD. It sounds enticing, right, to those who just don't really want to look at those things.
Yeah, it's great. In fact, one of the podcasts I was listening to was Dr. Ramesh, and I loved it because he was talking about being a CEO. And one of the first comments she made was make time. So I'll give you sort of two examples of what that means. First, I'll go back to IDOC Select, right? So IDOC Select, well, how does that make time, Dave? Well, you're actually focused on 2 contact lenses, and you're giving most of your share to 2 contact lens companies, Alcon and Cooper. We've now extended that to also have Cooper and Bausch and Lomb as options. But coming out of the contact lens business myself, you can kind of do most of your patients with 2 and maybe a little bit more. So if you pick 2, that's 2 less reps you're talking to, 2 less shipments coming in, 2 less everything. And so you're simplifying, and simplifying does mean making time. And then the other one, of course, is books and benchmarks, which you mentioned. You'd be surprised how many doctors still do their books, and they're doing it at 9 o'clock at night, or they're closing their books, on the weekend and stuff. And I get it. I understand it. There's some like to do it. Some like to see the numbers, but we can do that too. We can give you time back. We can give you benchmarks. And so you can buy time too, right? So there's lots of different ways you can simplify, you can buy time. But that's what we're all about. We're about trying to help the practice do the job of being an owner easier. Because I'll have to tell you, the stress is off the charts for all of us, frankly. But for a small business owner, very, very stressful. So we want to provide these services, provide these simplification tools, and frankly, the peer-to-peer as well, because independent doctor can be a lonely job.
It can be. I'm doing a presentation in a couple of weeks on burnout. And another IDOC, another doctor who's involved with IDOC, Dr. Steve Vargo, was on the podcast a little ways back, but we talked about burnout. This was probably a couple of years ago now. And he was saying some of the same things that you're saying now, which makes so much sense, especially now that I've been doing more research to give this talk of my own. But that having that time, and that also that what you just said, a lot of solo doctors, they feel kind of siloed and they don't have that connection, and those things are more likely to cause burnout. So having the time to do the things that you want to do, having the connection to other people, having the ability to have a network and people to communicate with, that's all very, very important to prevent burnout. And burnout, very much a big topic and a big concern these days. That's great. Thank you so much for giving us a bit of a better understanding of the landscape, and why independent optometry is so important, and the resources that IDOC provides are so important for independent ODs to thrive. I feel like many of us are just surviving sometimes, but having those services and resources will certainly help us thrive. So Dave, I wanted to ask you a little bit about some investments that were made into IDOC. In particular, a few months back, something came around that I think raised some eyebrows, an investment from Doug and Mary Perkins, who are the founders of Specsavers. So I'd love for you if you could just share with us a little bit about that investment and what that means for IDOC and IDOC members.
Sure. No, I appreciate it, and really delighted to talk about this. This is also one of the reasons for the brand refresh and so many of the things we're going to be able to keep doing for the IDOC member. So, this recent investment, it's exciting for IDOC. So for those of you maybe who aren't familiar with Doug and Mary Perkins, they're UK-based optometrists and entrepreneurs and philanthropists, and their whole life has been dedicated to changing lives through better sight and hearing. And they own, as you said, and they own an investment portfolio of companies, and that includes Specsavers, but many others as well. And so, they have a common mission, and this is what's most important, of supporting independent business owners. All of their businesses are owned by independent doctors, optometrists, and so that's really critical. So when they looked at the U.S. landscape, because they've always had ambitions of coming to the U.S., they really saw IDOC as a really interesting place because of all that we're doing, all the things that we spoke about, and our unwavering support for independent optometrists. So, it really, for me as the CEO, for us as a company, what really makes it really powerful is that we can now access their companies. They have 7,000 business owners around the world who are involved in eye care. There are 50 million patients under the care of those 7,000. I'm including IDOC in that 7,000 number. 1 billion contact lenses, 30 million frames. And so you start to hear the scale, but not only that, the expertise. So what we can do now is we can tap into this, still run the business as we're running it, still CEO Dave Brown, but let's go understand and have different conversations. As an example, myopia management glasses have been approved overseas for some years. We can go talk to those doctors and get advanced sort of thinking about how that might impact what's happening now in the US. Mm-hmm. So that's just one example of how I can go out now and access, this tremendous reservoir of information. The other big piece of it, frankly, is just the supply chain. With a company that large and all the companies and the relationships that they have, it's just a different conversation when we're sitting across the table and looking for support from our vendor partners, because they're now viewing IDOC not only as a US company, but as a global company. So, I'll stress again, we are about independent optometry. Doug and Mary Perkins are not private equity. When they invest in businesses, they invest for the long run. And that's so freeing for a CEO, for a company to think long-term, to put things in action that maybe will take some time to come to fruition. But we go to work every day for independent optometrists, as they do in their companies around the globe. And just delighted to talk about it, because now, you're going to be seeing over the next 12 to 18 months, things from IDOC that I'm not sure anybody else is going to compete with. And I'm really excited to bring that to the marketplace.
Yeah, I can see that investment in that knowledge and the resources that brings is potentially very beneficial. I think the concern that some would have is it seems a bit, if we see the presence of Specsavers in other parts around the world and how they've changed the landscape. And as you mentioned, Specsavers has been interested in coming to the US for a long time. I think some of us know that, looking for that. And they've recently come into Canada, recently in the last few years, through the purchase of a small group of practices, coincidentally right here in Vancouver in BC, and then have spread across the country. But in Australia, for example, I think Australia may be the place where they kind of made the biggest impact, obviously starting in the UK, and then seemed like a similar, I can't say that these are apples to apples, but similar type of a play where they bought into an independent optometry group. And then essentially, now there's a very large portion of the practices or optometrists are working under Specsavers. And, if we're concerned about independent optometry becoming smaller and smaller, it seems like a bit of a concern to have a player like Specsavers come in, and if they're starting to take up some of that market share, it potentially would make private practice optometry, a smaller piece of the pie as well.
Yeah, look, I think the biggest thing to speak about here, and I appreciate you bringing up those examples, is all these markets are different. The Canada market, Australia, the UK, they're all very different laws, different vision plans. Obviously, really the US has the vision plan. So what I'm most excited about is they looked at IDOC and they said, we love this business model. We love the independent optometrists running their practice with their brand in the ways that they want to, but the things that we're bringing, I believe we can go out to some of those other companies and relationships and bring even more to the independent doctor. But in the US, we are about the independent doctor. It's a very complex industry. It's a very lots of choices for the consumer to go to. And our job is to make independent optometry more attractive, frankly, to have more of the next generation coming into independent optometry. And at its core will be to run the practice the way you want to run the practice. So, I'll just stress that the investment in IDOC is an investment in the future of independent optometry. It's not an investment in stores. It's not an investment in what they've done in other countries. And that's what makes me most excited about the future.
Yeah, if I can, I don't want to belabor the point, but just on the point of independence, I understand that. I understand it was the Perkins investing, not Specsavers investing, but and Specsavers is in their portfolio. But as far as the independence of doctors who work in Specsavers, I understand the doctor of optometry is independent, but in the terms of what we're talking about independent optometry, I think we're talking about two different things there, right? So independent optometry, as far as optometrists who are part of IDOC, they own the entire business. They run the entire business front to back, the optical, the specialty services, and all of that. Whereas in a setting like a Specsavers, the independent optometrist sort of is a business partner in that space. They're not really owning the entire optical. They're not owning the entire space and running it the way they would want. So I feel like there's a difference, at least to say an independent optometrist working within a Specsavers versus an independent optometrist who owns their own practice. I think they're two very different things. And maybe the word independent optometrist is being misused a little bit in some cases there. But in any case, like I said, I don't want to belabor that point. I just want to make that distinction between an independent working within a Specsavers versus an independent who owns their own practice and runs it front to back and does all the books and all that kind of stuff. So I think they're two very different things. And I think IDOC is supporting the latter, the person who owns their own practice and is providing the services and resources to them. I think that's amazing. So I don't know if you have any other comments to make on that. I just wanted to
look, I think there's a lot of nuances, right? There's a lot of ways and definitions. I think ownership is the most important piece, right? Anybody who has an ownership stake in a business just goes to work differently than someone who doesn't, right? Someone once told me nobody washes a rental car before they take it back, right? So ownership is what's critical. And so in other corporate settings in the US, the doctor doesn't own the practice. They go to work, they might take some of the revenue. So we don't need to get into a lot more, but the point, I understand what you're saying, but that ownership does make a difference. And, again, back to the US, these independent owners do great things, but I would say they shouldn't do as much, right? They should let us in IDOC do some things and services and whatnot. And so, that might mean they're not doing everything soup to nuts, but I think they should be giving up some of those things to get time back and focus on patient care and don't worry so much about bookkeeping. So, but I appreciate the discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Dave, anything else that you'd like to share? Anything we missed that you'd want to make sure that our listeners hear before we wrap up?
Look, I think that we've had a great wide-ranging conversation here. IDOC, been around 25 years. We touched on the brand refresh, so people are going to see a lot more about IDOC. We're very easy to join. You can just go to idoc.net. We're offering free membership for 6 months right now because we're so excited about the future. We want people to come on board. We want them to come to the connection. Anybody can come to our meetings. And so, we're standing behind what we're offering here. And this house of brands and all that IDOC has to offer, we're going to be seeing a lot more of it. You'll be seeing a lot more of it. And so, I do appreciate the time today to just really get into a little bit more about IDOC. I sort of said it's the best kept secret. That's not going to be the case anymore. And I'm thrilled to have this opportunity for you and your audience to learn more about IDOC.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that, Dave. And congratulations to IDOC for this. Like you said, it's not something you undertake lightly. It must have been a very big undertaking and a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes. So congratulations. And yeah, look forward to seeing more. And, I want to just reiterate this one thing I said earlier. One of the things that I find that tells me how good an organization is, the quality of it, is the people. I mean, I think we can attest to that regardless of which company or organization you're talking about. And everybody I've come across through IDOC and the ODs that I know who are involved are all excellent. And, I learn from them every time I speak with them. So, that tells me that IDOC is definitely doing something right. So encourage any ODs in the US to learn more, and in general go attend the meeting. As I said, very good meeting, and I think you'll be really glad that you did. So thanks again, Dave, and thank you to everybody who's listening and watching to the 2020 podcast, Canada's #1 optometry podcast. We'll see you guys in the next episode.